This morning. We are delighted to be joined by FDA's in-market partner for the Latin American region, the Global Strategies and Tools. And today we'll be joined by Diane, who will be giving us her presentation on Chile and Peru. So this is two markets completely new for FDA Market Insights. We have not done a Market Insights webinar on Chile and Peru before. So I'm interested to hear all about it as well. Just to reiterate, so Diane this is a series of webinars. We have done one in the past recently on Mexico and Colombia. And we've got one coming up in September on Panama and Ecuador as well. So if you do want to revisit the webinar recording from the one on Mexico and Colombia, I can of course circulate that after the webinar as well. This webinar is being recorded, so you can pass it on to your colleagues, and I'll send you the link after the webinar today. I think we are expecting quite a lot of people on the call today. So if you do have questions, if you can pop them in the chat box for Diane as we go along, and we will come back to them at the end of her presentation. So Diane, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Diane Trejo. As Mel mentioned, we are the Latin American market expert. I'll start sharing my screen. It's actually funny because I was talking to Mel before the call started that I just got back from vacation, and it's ironic because we're going to be covering Chile, and as everyone knows, their capital is Santiago, and I was just in Santiago, Spain for a few days, so I did think that that was pretty funny, and I will use it as maybe a little FYI, in case I still have some vacation brain, please bear with me. But today we'll be discussing Chile and Peru. We'll be discussing navigating the regulations and distribution channels in these two countries. As Mel mentioned, we are doing these market insights where we'll be covering different countries in Latin America. And just to kind of go into the first details of what the market might look like, since I do think that this is something that's new or maybe something that's not so explored by many companies. So we'll go first into the import landscape of the food and beverage industry in each of these countries. First, we'll start with Chile. So in Chile, the total imports from January 2024 to June 2025, it reached 1.8 billion. And if we look at the quarterly breakdown, we're able to see that this is constantly growing. From the first quarter to 2024, it continually is growing each quarter. And to 2025, in the last quarter that we looked at, we saw that it had already exceeded the previous quarters. In terms of countries of origin, we can see that the United States is one of the top players. They do take up 16% of the market. And the next two players are kind of head to head, which is Mexico and Colombia. Then we also have Brazil and China, Ecuador and Chile. Chile is referring to the domestic imports of the products that are going to be used directly inside the country without any intent of exporting. And in terms of the product categories, we do see some of the bigger categories like sugars, miscellaneous food preparation. They do take most of the market together with alcohol and tuna and bonito fish. So these are four categories that are kind of all in the same range. Then we go into the bakery and pastry products, which is also another big product category, and the confectionery products without cocoa. And what we see with these figures is that what we can identify as a potential opportunity for UK companies in these industries is that there's a constant demand in the sweet, the processed, the confectionery goods. There's also always a big, strong incline towards the alcoholic beverages. This is something that we've touched on many on the other webinars, and we see that it's happening in many of the countries in Latin America. It is something that people are very interested into. We also see the trends in the supermarkets and the consumer behavior leaning towards the ready-to-eat food. I think that this is more of a international trend nowadays, as we're all so busy and we're all looking to find these kind of quick meals that are maybe a little bit more healthy than what you can find on fast food. And we also see that the gourmet items are growing in these regions, specifically in Chile and Peru. We'll see that these countries are price sensitive, as Latin America is in general price sensitive market. But we do see that in Chile, for example, there is a grow in interest in the gourmet category, which is always, of course, a great thing to hear if you have some sort of brand that is maybe a little bit more special or a higher price point. So we do think that anything with the premium packaging, any sort of jam or tea, biscuit, chocolate, these types of things would do well in Chile, and it's something that could be explored. Also, the alcoholic beverages, and also we'll get into maybe just more of the specific things that we'll need to get into the market. But first, let's just cover the rest of the import and details there. So for Peru, for the imports from January 2024 to June 2025, we saw that there's a total import value of, sorry, this is in pounds, it's 1.7 billion. And in terms of the quarterly breakdown, we have also a growing trend in Peru. So we see from if we compare the first quarter of 2024 to 2025, we see that there's a jump there. And we do see that it grows as the quarters go by. Then in the top countries of origin, we have also United States, which takes up the 19.5%, which is a significant amount. Then we have Brazil with 13% of the market share. We also have Ecuador and Mexico going head to head for around 10% of countries of origin. We have Chile here, China, and Colombia, which are also very strong players in the market. In terms of the top imported products in specifically Peru, we see that there's also sugar and bakery products. There's also the confectionery without cocoa and the alcohol and the miscellaneous food preparation. So the market is similar in terms of what is being imported, what are the top players in the market. We do see that there's opportunities similar in as what I mentioned for Chile in the categories of the gourmet, the premium packaging, maybe products that sell some sort of story behind it can be marketed in a very positive way and incorporated into the local market. I do think that products that are able to differentiate themselves through presenting the story, they do very well as people would like to see that. And now going into the distribution strategies and the key players in both markets. We have in Chile, we have a very strong segment of the supermarkets. It dominates most of the distribution channel in Chile. So it does concentrate in a certain amount of few chains. So we have the Walmart, which lead the a few of the formats. They have different stores where, for example, they have the premium supermarket. They have also the more cost-friendly, the budget supermarket. So they do have different types, which attend to different segments of the supermarket. And in total, they have almost 400 storefronts, according to the approximation that we were able to get. For Cencosud, they also have two brands. So Jumbo, for example, is one of the more premium supermarkets where you can find a wide variety of items. They're usually a larger storefront. And Santa Isabel is another format that they have. And for example, for this other chain, there's also almost 300 at 250. So this is also a very big supermarket chain. Then we have SMU. They have a different format, similar to Walmart, where they have formats, supermarket formats that tend to different segments. They have the premium lines, they have the more the more low cost. They also have the bulk stores where you can go in and buy. This is tending to the small restaurants and the small businesses where they can go in and buy bulk items. So they also have these formats, and it's also approximated to be around 400. And Falabella it's a big giant in Latin America in general, and it's present in Chile with their brand Totus, which has around 70 stores. In terms of the other distribution channels that you might find strategic for Chile, we have the wholesale markets and open air markets. Open air markets are something that is present throughout the country. They are these sort of maybe farmer market is what you can compare it to, where you have these open areas and the sellers will have items out on these stands for people to look at. So there's the wholesale market. There's two big players, La Vega and Lo Valledor. They're two distribution centers for fresh and dry products where these end up going to the retailers and the end consumers. You also have convenience stores and e-commerce. Convenience stores and e-commerce have been growing, especially in the urban areas. This is more of a newer trend, I would say. And in terms of another distribution channel, you can go through the route of the importer just distributors, which of course this is also very recommended to diversify the way that you're entering the market. In Chile, for example, through an importer, through a partner that can facilitate also the logistics and the distribution to different channels, you can find a way to enter in different sales points. For Peru, we have a growing supermarket channel. I wouldn't say is as big as it is in Chile if we're comparing the two, but there are three big players. Cencosud Peru is one of the bigger players. They have the two stores, Wang and Metro. And this is we weren't able to find a more updated number. So 33 is the historical data of when they actually were able to merge with the Wang and Metro. So I put historical there just to highlight that. And Supermercados Peruanos is one of the biggest players in Peru. They manage all types of stores. They have the discount stores, they have the bulk stores. They have the express stores also where you can stop and get something very quickly. So for this one, there's a store count of 245 approximately. And for Falabella, which is also present in Peru, they have about 90 storefronts in the Totus segment. And I would say Peru is more on the traditional side in terms of the distribution channels. So they have these traditional markets where even though the supermarkets are growing, it's still maybe behind the traditional markets where it's just a neighborhood store where you go downstairs and maybe it's the same person that has been working there their entire life and you've known them since you were a child and you get your fruits and vegetables and the small products that you might need from that store. There's also the convenience stores and e-commerce trend happening in Peru where it's growing and the platforms are becoming more prevalent amongst consumers. Of course, we recommend the importer distributor method where you can find partners that help you, one, navigate the market, navigate its specific details in terms of regulations or getting into zones where you might not think that there would be opportunity and from their local perspective there would be. So these things always help in terms of the logistics, also opportunities and getting into different storefronts as we mentioned before with Chile. And there's also the mass consumption companies. So in Peru, we have two examples, Alicorp, AGE Group, where they have extensive distribution networks that they covered multiple of these sales channels, where they're also an interesting option for companies that are looking to diversify and not only be in one channel. So now we'll get into the more dense part of the regulations and the requirements for the import of food and beverages. Specifically for Chile, we'll be looking at the registration and sanitary authorization. We'll be looking at the sanitary certification, labeling, the requirements, and the authorization for use and disposal. So what I wanted to do here is kind of go step by step. Well, we won't go into too much detail because, of course, as everyone knows, this is very specific to the product that you have. And there are specifics to each step that go along with that. But in general, I wanted to kind of just walk through the process. For example, the first step would be the importer registration with SAG. SAG is Agricultural and Livestock Service in Chile. So what usually happens here is that the Chile importer that will be receiving your partner, your distributor, they will be registered with SAG. This is usually something that is already done. So it's not necessarily something to be concerned with. So they have to be eligible to be able to import the food products. Then from there, before shipping, you have to confirm any sort of requirements for the product through SAG. And of course, this is just to make sure that the restrictions or treatments are kept in mind when they're doing the import. In terms of the sanitary certificate in the UK, the you can use the sanitary certificate from the UK authorities. The only thing there is that it needs to specifically certify the fact that it meets the Chilean sanitary requirements, and it would have to be translated, of course. That's an important step here. In terms of the labeling, for anyone that was here in our last webinar, we might be already familiar with the labeling in Latin America. For example, here in Chile, we have a different form, and it's a form that shows that these products are high in sugars or high in calories, high in saturated fats, high in sodium. So all of the products must be properly labeled in according to the Chilean regulation. And this is how the icon would look. It would be on the top right side of the packaging on the front side. And this is due to a regulation that was put into place in Chile, as many other countries in Latin America, as you guys have been learning and will continue learning as we do these webinars. And aside from that, the labeling must also include the traditional ingredients, production date, expiration date. It also needs to have the name of the producer, packager, distributor, and importer on the packaging. In terms of the health authority authorization for use and disposal, once they arrive in Chile, you also have to get a document that validates the product circulation throughout the market. This is done through the regional ministry of health. So it's just something that is done after the product has already arrived to the country so that it can circulate through the market. And in theory, these steps will not take that long, but I say in theory because, of course, there's backlog. There is maybe some sort of details or a paperwork that has not been filed correctly, which do delay the process. But I would say that Chile, according to the structure that they have in place, it is one of the quicker markets. I do say in theory because, of course, we all know how regulations work, and getting these paperwork things, these little details down, sometimes it can be a hassle. So going into the regulations that we might have to keep an eye for, at least up to 2024. We were able to see that there is the update to the food regulation where it applies to all of the stages. So there are just small details that have been updated there for the production, import, packaging, storage, and sale. I won't get into it because this is very specific information, but you have at least the regulation there to look into it. There's also the food labeling law that we mentioned, where it limits the energy, the sodium, and sugar, saturated fats on items. We also have the authorization for use and disposal of imported food. This is what I was mentioning before, that it's the required documentation. And I wanted to highlight here that sometimes it does include some sample testing, but it is mandatory for all imported food commercialization. So it would apply. In terms of the regulations and requirements for Peru, we're going to be looking at the sanitary registration, the certificate of free sale, labeling, customs, documentation, and specific sanitary requirements. We will see that there are some similarities. For example, the certificate of free sale is something that is required. It's the first step as to how we can organize the way that we would do this process for UK exporters. So first is the certificate of free sale. We would use this product. Sorry, we would use this document to be able to start the process. And this is issued by the Peruvian consulate if required, and if required, to legalize the document. So what you can do in this case is you can either translate and apostille the document, or you can have it legalized by the Peruvian consulate. It's usually recommended to do the first format where you get the translation and get the apostille. In terms of the labeling, it's also very similar to the other countries that we've mentioned in the past, with this sort of warning for high sugars, high sodium, and high saturated fats. If we see in this example, there is a small box beneath the icon where it does say, it translates to please limit your consumption of this item. So this is something that is different perhaps than what we've seen in the past. And it does make it a challenge, as each of these countries have their specific hexagon, octagon, one with a little box on on the bottom. So these details are something that we have to keep in mind, as it's important to be compliant to be able to enter the market. And in terms of the labeling, there's also the traditional ingredients, nutritional value, production expiration dates, as well as the required health warnings. In terms of the the sanitary registration in Peru, we have to submit the certificate of free sale and any of the required documents to DSM. And with this, we will be able to get the sanitary registration, which is mandatory to be able to import the product. Then, if applicable, it does depend on the product. There might be product-specific sanitary tests, which can be microbiological tests. It could be nutritional analysis certificates, or any sort of certificate for quality or production standards. In terms of the customs documentation, we also have to submit the single customs declaration, as well as more documents along with the commercial invoice, the transport document, the certificate of origin. So once it's cleared, once the product is actually cleared, then that's when we go into submitting the documentation for the entire import process and the documentation behind more of the product. And some regulations that we should keep in mind for Peru, at least up until 2025, we were seeing the sanitary regulation. It's similar to what I mentioned before for Chile, where it establishes the health and safety standards for imported food, specifically in terms of the sanitary registration, labeling, and product quality control. This will be very specific. So I did leave the information there if you would like to look into it and see how it applies. And as we mentioned before with the food warnings, there's the Healthy Eating Promotion Law. It's a law that applies to items, and it makes it mandatory to have these black octagon labels on the products. And it's important to keep this in mind, of course. Now, getting into the best practices of successful importers in Chile and Peru, I thought that this would be a nice little segment to cover, where we can see what are kind of the things that are happening in the market, what works in Chile and Peru, and some examples of how that can work in terms of distribution, digitalization, international positioning, and sustainability. So, for example, in diversification of distribution channels, we have the company ICB from Chile. They are the distributor of very well-known brands like Barilla, Nutella, Ferrero. And what they do is that they have diversified their channels to include supermarkets, convenience stores, and the restaurant industry. So this is one example. Another example in Peru, for example, is a company that is a subsidiary of Garozi, and what they have is a B2B platform. It's an online store that is closed. to specific restaurants and specialty shops where they can target that segment directly through their online shop, which is a new technique that companies might implement to be able to get to this segment. In terms of the technology, kind of going off of that same line of technology and digitalization, we also have, I'll skip to the AGE group in Peru, which also has the closed B2B e-commerce stores. So it is something that is working. This would be more towards the small retailers and the restaurants, which of course it helps for these restaurants to have that access 24 hours a day, all week, to be able to place their orders and kind of see the catalog that they have available to them. And then going back to the UNK, what they've done is they've optimized the cold chain logistics, trying to or implementing technologies to make it more speedy, more efficient in the perishable product distribution. In terms of sustainability and social impact, we see this prevalent in many companies. For example, Grupo Gloria from Peru, a really big company that has demonstrated their dedication towards sustainability, and it not only includes sustainable practices in the supply chain, but it also supports social initiatives to the communities where they operate. And this is just one example, but throughout Latin America and throughout these two countries in Peru and Chile, we do see that companies are really showing what they're doing, how they're giving back. You see how they're giving back to the local communities, or they're giving back to communities that are affected by impoverished areas, or maybe more political or social situations. So these are things that are really important into selling the story. I think that this also goes hand in hand what I mentioned before about how you tell a story or how you market is very important in these markets, where if you present a story and you present either the benefits or the sustainable practices, the social impact, or just a nice story behind the product itself, it does help to grow into the market. And it seems that we sped through, so we have a great space for questions. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you so much for being here. It's Thursday, so it's almost Friday, and that's always great. I hope that everyone enjoyed the webinar and that it's useful for you. Mel, if you want to jump into any questions, we can go ahead and do that.
Thanks, Diane. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was really interesting to learn about those two new markets. Just a couple of questions I had regarding, well, really consumer behavior in both the markets. And we've had some recent presentations on new markets and sort of the preference for shopping via markets rather than in the retailers. I just wondered what it was like in both Chile and Peru in terms of yeah, where do they shop? How do they shop?
Yeah, Mel, that's a great question. I would say that traditionally, the way that you would shop in these markets is by going to these local, the one that you have downstairs that your family has known the entire life, and getting your products, your produce from there, and very kind of segmented stores. And now with the growth of these huge supermarkets, the growth of these markets that have everything in the same place, and the way that society is kind of moving towards quick solutions, I do think that now is when the supermarket chain is becoming more prevalent, and now consumers are kind of going towards there. But of course, there are still a lot of rural areas in these two countries where mostly the option is the mom and pop shops, the one that is one for the whole the whole small town in a rural area. So it kind of depends.
Yeah. I can see a question from Will at Tina. We have in the chat box, it says, what are the generic taxation on importing beverages into Chile and Peru?
The generic taxation.
Mm,
I think that would be best to maybe look into it to more detail, because I
yeah,
think it would be best to look at either what sort of product are we thinking about, what sort of market we're looking into. So,
yeah. This is specifically to water, I think.
yeah.
Yeah, if we can, if yeah, I think maybe if she can come back to you well on that separately after the webinar with some figures on the taxes.
Mhm.
Um, Anybody else got any questions? If you want to take yourself off mute and ask away, is
Also,
anybody
I can take
currently?
advantage of this space to propose that if anyone would like to do a one-on-one call with the team that we have, we can jump on a call, see what sort of situation you're in, what are your objectives specifically for these two markets, or also any other market that you have in mind for Latin America. And from there, we're able to kind of see what's the best route. It would be, of course, just a consultation to see what's the best route to take or what are the recommendations that we can give off right off the bat and then go from there.
Yeah, yeah, you have offered that previously, I remember. So that's really useful to know. Um, yeah, if anybody else has any questions, then
Oh,
please get yourself off mute.
there's a question here from Craig.
Ah,
Can you connect with retailers directly or do they purchase via importers and distributors? I would say it's a mix for both retailers directly and importers and distributors. So, what we do recommend is importers and distributors will take a load off of having to worry about maybe these more logistic details, the distribution details. You're also able to cover more territory and more storefronts through that method. But in terms of retailers, what we have seen in the past is there are certain conditions that retailers, the bigger ones, that they require. So they require you to go through this sort of registration into a platform, or they go into some sort of documentation that you have to submit to them. So each of them come with their challenges, of course. With the retailers going directly to them, there are these maybe procedural challenges that you can face, but it also would be a direct contact, which is also a positive thing. Then, in terms of the importers and distributors, they're the positive that you're able to reach more territory or different storefronts, different chains. You're able to get to different markets, which is a good thing. But then you have the con of the importers and distributors also having other products. So maybe they're not solely focused on helping yours grow. So it does depend on the situation. I would say that a mix of these two would be the best, the ideal thing. What we usually like to do, as we are consultants in this, what we usually do is we find a mix of going directly to the retailers, knocking on those doors, seeing what sort of works with them. And then we also knock on the doors of importers and distributors to see is it also possible through that way? Is it more strategic through that way? And then you kind of get the best view from there based on the responses.
and are there retail chains that are more open to taking international brands?
Yeah, there's some that are more open to taking into the international brands, and then there's some that, for example, if you don't have a local partner, they won't discuss with you. What I see the challenge is mostly for these bigger chains is that they want you to have your registration done already. They want to see that you're already able to be in the market, and in these conversations, even if you're able to get into the front door, it just stops at the fact that you don't have your registration yet, so there's nothing that we can really do, and it limits the communication, which in my perspective, based off of the experience that I have in the industry, it is a challenge for the companies that are just starting in a market because you want to approach the market, get a feel for how it is, but then you get stopped there where if you don't have the registration, basically there's nothing we can do or nothing we can tell you. So it's difficult. It's kind of placing a bet on a market, getting the registration to go through, and then exploring it. It's a interesting process to understand which is the best way to go first. Start interacting, start discussing with these companies, get a feel for the market, and at the same time start your process, the registration process, or go with the registration process. And as you're almost done, start discussing with the companies.
Hey, Patrick, do you have a question?
Uh, yeah, we just recently started dealing with falabella in both Peru and Chile. Uh, and correct, there's a lot of registrations to go through. The labeling's quite complicated, and all in all, once it's done, and I believe it's quite good. We were lucky. We picked up these accounts in on the ISM this February, and we were lucky that they came to our stand and came to us.
It's great
Uh,
with kids, yeah.
yeah, and once you're dealing with them, they're once they're in with you, they're in, and they do very well and they support you. But it's a drag out. We're still completing since February. We're still waiting for labeling from their part on the registrations because the Peru is different than Chile, and we were going to go into Colombia, but they thought it was just too much all at once. So we're just in Chile and Peru.
Are there, I just out of interest, are there any sort of South African markets where which are pretty uniform in terms of the labeling, the packaging that's required? Or are they all pretty, they've all got their own different things that they need?
Speaking to
In
me, oh, sorry.
in South America, Mel.
Yeah,
I would say the challenge is that each government has their own hexagon, their
yeah.
own circle. So, as we saw in Mexico, for example, it's a different shape. In Colombia, it's a different shape. So, I would say that kind of the processes that you're going to see are mostly the same, where you have to do these same documents. Maybe small details change or the process changes in which the order it's done. But I would say that they're similar but not close enough where it applies the same thing for different markets, which it does make it a challenge. And
Correct.
that's what is really the hardest part into getting into multiple markets. So I would agree with what Falabella said. Sometimes it's easier to just focus on a few markets rather than gathering all together. And also, for example, in Colombia, right now we're looking at really long lead times for this registration process. So it makes sense why they would say, let's just wait off on that and focus on these two before we
Yeah.
get into a third.
And another strange thing, which was a bit hard to understand, was uh, in our gifting range, we have musical tins, which they were keen to go ahead with, but then they find out that they're not
Mm.
registered for music in within the store, so they couldn't go ahead with that product. So it's all sorts of bits and pieces.
And sometimes they present themselves in the path as you're going along, as you're advancing. Sometimes it's just, oh, we just realized that it's not
Yeah,
possible, something like
yes,
that.
yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Got another couple of questions as well. Someone asking about private label. Is it significant in the dairy sector or is it brand preferred?
I would say that it really does depend. I would go back to the point where we were discussing that consumers they are becoming a little bit less price sensitive, kind of focusing on the premium, the more gourmet. So I would say the consumers that are still price sensitive, that maybe have a lower economic purchasing power, they would still go with the white label companies, the low cost brand. But then there's also the prevalence of maybe the more premium, an Irish cow logo on there, something that really shows like this is special milk. And I would say that those kind of brands have also been growing more recently, which is a new growth that has been kind of going throughout the region and specifically in Chile and Peru.
Okay. And in terms of private label generally, that's on the rise in many markets. Is it the same sort of trend for Chile and Peru?
Yeah, so what I would say there is that a lot of you'll get two types of feedback when you discuss with these local partners. One will be I only accept private label and I only will do my own brand, and then the other one is let's incorporate your brand. So having that sort of flexibility or knowing whether or not you're open to that from the beginning is very important because I would say I can't put like a 50-50 or a percentage to it, but I would say that I've seen both of these situations where companies will only accept private label, or they will only want to distribute brands. So it does depend on sort of the profile that you're looking for. Of course, you can check into, if you're going to look directly into a retailer, for example, you can look into the products that they have in the store. And if you see that they only have certain brands and the brands don't necessarily look like they're a third person party, they're rather their own brand, then you can see, okay, well, this is the type of profile that only will want to do private label. And then you can get a feel also just looking at the products that the company has.
Okay. Another question here regarding, is there any official organization where we can check the procedures on how to register importers, distributors in both Chile and Peru? I think this is another, again, a question which comes up time and time again, is where you find out this information.
Yeah. Well, I actually found a great tool as I was doing research for this. There's a very extensive PDF file. It was for Peru that goes into the information where it goes into the whole process of being able to import your product. And what they want to do there is they want to encourage companies to go into the market. And I thought that that's a really good tool. But the challenge here is that most of the sources of information you will find in Spanish, which nowadays it's easy to translate them. So it's not as much as a challenge as it used to be in the past, but it still will be mostly presented in Spanish. I do think that another good source of information are the embassies, the trade organizations. So the UK has great sources of information. Also, US has great sources of information where these trade organizations gather sources from the local governments, and they're able to present it in a way that is maybe a little more digestible. But what we can do is we can look into some sort of specific links and share them with everyone so that you can also have
That would be
these
great. I
sources
can
of information.
see Valentina, Diane's colleagues, put a few links in the chat box, so I'll make sure that I share that with everybody
Yeah.
after the webinar as well.
Also in the presentation, in most of the points, for example, the registrations, I did put the name of the organization, the acronym, and what it would translate to in English, just to facilitate the conversation. But you can look up that acronym and put Chile, Peru, and you will be able to find the official link. Then hopefully they'll have the English page available for you. But if not, of course, any questions are welcomed, and we're happy to help.
Great, thank you. Any further questions? If anybody wants to take themselves off mute, please do so now. I think we might have come to the end of the questions. Well, thank you, Diane. That was brilliant. And like I said, please do take Diane up on her offer of a meeting just to have a general chat about where your products might be best suited to in Latin American markets that they cover. You cover quite a range of markets. I don't know if you just want to give a quick rundown of the markets that you're actually in.
Yeah, of course. So far, what we've covered, for example, Colombia, Mexico, we have Chile, Peru, we also have Panama, we have coverage in the Caribbean area, so the islands there. We also have coverage in Brazil is a different language, so I would say let's put Brazil into a different category. We can always look into what options are there. I wouldn't say it's one of the most covered options that we have since we are more in the Latin Spanish speaking area. But I think that if there's a specific market that you're looking into, we probably have worked in that market already, as we have 20 years of experience that takes you down crazy paths. Also, the managing director of our company just loves a new challenge. So I do think that it's always great to look at what sort of options we have.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that if you are going out to visit these markets and get in contact with them as well, because I think you do lots of different events around the region. So yeah, do take Diane and her offer of a clinic, a clinic call. So I'll be adding Diane's contact details, her presentation, the recording, the links that Valentina's put in the chat box as well. And yes, if you are around on the 16th of September and like to find out a bit more about Panama and Ecuador as well, then do make sure that you sign up for that webinar as well. But thank you so much for your time, Diane, this morning.
No, thank you, Mel, for having us. It's been a pleasure to speak about these markets, to always advocate for the opportunities and kind of share the knowledge that we have.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, everyone. And we'll be in touch soon. Thanks very much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mel.
Bye.